Hi there, welcome back to the Grape Explorer. In this short series, I'm taking you through a detailed look at WSET Level 1, helping you understand the topics you'll be covering, as well as those all-important questions. If you haven't checked out Part 1, please do so first and then come back to this one, Part 2. Part 2 is all about Learning Outcome 2, and Learning Outcome 2 is for you to understand the types, characteristics and styles of wines made from the principal grape varieties and other examples of wines. When it comes to the exam, and there are 30 questions in the exam, Learning Outcome 2 represents 60% of all the questions asked. So as you can imagine, this is where the exam is going to be won or lost. So we will be spending a little bit more time today getting you comfortable with the grape varieties covered and the types of questions you might get asked. When it comes to Learning Outcome number 2, the assessment criteria is as follows. You're going to need to be able to name and define the types of wines and the characteristics that contribute to their styles. You need to name the principal grape varieties and be able to identify the characteristics and styles of their wines. You need to identify and relate examples of wines from principal grape varieties to the varieties, types, characteristics and styles. And then finally, identify and relate other examples of wines to the types and characteristics and styles of wines. Now that does seem like an awful lot for the learning outcome, but when it comes to the principal grape varieties and some of the areas that are covered as part of Learning Outcome number 2, it's not so broad as to put you off and make you worried. As I said on the previous video, once we've gone through the questions today, if you feel that you're comfortable in the knowledge that you're covering here today, you may want to look at Level 2 first. But Level 1 does a fantastic job of introducing you to the learning format and particularly the question style. And I was really glad that I started at Level 1. So let's get straight into the first part of the assessment criteria. That was being able to name and define the types of wines and the characteristics that contribute to their style. So the types of wines you cover at Level 1 are still wines, sparkling wines and fortified wines. You'll be going through the spectrum of colours for wines, that's white, red and rosé. You'll be starting to pick out specific characteristics for the wines that you are studying. You might pick out things like sweetness, acidity, tannin, alcohol and body. You'll need to be able to pick out certain aromas and flavours and identifiers for different wines. Things like fruit indicators, oak indicators, as well as other characteristics as well. And then you're going to be looking at different styles of wine, which are really a combination of the things that we've just covered there. And what I mean by that is you may be presented with a particular style of wine, such as, let's say, a Chablis, and you'll need to be able to talk about some of the characteristics from an aroma and flavour perspective, as well as some of those characteristics around things like acidity, body, sweetness. So as with videos in this series, I've constructed a series of questions to get you comfortable with the question format and to give you a good insight into what you might get asked in the exam. So let's start off with one of those to put you to the test. Where do you sense sweetness in wine? Do you sense it on the sides of the tongue, the roof of the mouth, your gums, or the tip of your tongue? Now, whilst this might seem quite a strange question, as part of Level 1, you're actually introducing yourself to wine tasting as well and getting comfortable with taking notes. And part of being able to take good, effective wine tasting notes is being able to sense what the wine tastes like, and different parts of your mouth are going to sense different qualities in the wine. I always think of tannin as that drying roof of the mouth sensation. But when it comes to sweetness, you sense it on the tip of your tongue. Now, what aroma would you associate with a wine described as oaked? Would it be vanilla, apple, melon or raspberry? And again, you're going to be tasting a series of wines through the course. And through that and taking your notes, you'll be tasting some unoaked wines as well as some oaked wines. And your course tutor will help you understand the key aromas and flavours associated with an oaked wine. In the case of this answer, it's vanilla. And then finally, which of the following would describe a wine as too high in acidity? Would it be smooth, sweet, tart or oaky? And again, this comes back to you starting to take wine tasting notes, building up your repertoire of terminology. And when we come to too much acidity in wine, we're talking about something that is tart. And so with some basic tasting vocabulary under your belt, let's move on to the next assessment criteria. And this is where you're starting to name the principal grape varieties and identifying the characteristics and styles of their wine. At level 1, your focus is on the following white grape varieties: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio and Riesling. And then from a black grape perspective, you'll be focusing on Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir and Syrah Shiraz, dependent on where in the world you are. And so the next set of questions are based around getting you familiar and comfortable with putting a grape into a question format. Which of the following is a black grape? Is it Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio or Cabernet Sauvignon? Now, as I've said previously, you may find some of these questions to be particularly easy. And if that's the case, it may be that level 2 is the right starting point for you. But level 1 is all about giving you that good grounding. The answer here, of course, is Cabernet Sauvignon, the black grape. Which of the following fruit flavours would you associate with Merlot? Is it pineapple, plum, apple or melon? And what I like about this question is, first of all, you're having to recall, well, is Merlot a white or a black grape? And once you've done that, of course, you'll then start to think about some of the relevant associated flavours and aromas that come with a black grape. In the case of the ones that we've got on the screen here right now, pineapple, apple and melon, not associated with black grapes, which of course Merlot is, so that can only leave one answer, and that is plum. And warm climate Chardonnay is often described as having which fruit character? Is it blackcurrants, plums, tropical fruits or fruits of the forest? And again, with this question, you deduce, well, what style of grape is Chardonnay first, black or white? And once you've got that, you can start to think about the flavours and aromas. Chardonnay, of course, is a white grape, so of the 4 choices here, there's only really one which is relevant. That would be C, tropical fruits, because Chardonnay can display things like pineapple, mango, for example. Fantastic, warmer, hotter climate aromas for Chardonnay. With the principal grape varieties covered off, you then move on to the next assessment criteria. And that's where you need to identify and relate examples of wines from principal grape varieties to the types and characteristics and styles of wine they produce. So for white wines, you may be focusing on something like Sancerre, Chablis or white Burgundy. You may then focus on the red Burgundies made from Pinot Noir, as well as the Bordeaux blends, Cabernet Sauvignon with Merlot. And then finally, you'll be looking at sparkling champagne. And there's a couple of grapes that we cover off on this course that contribute to sparkling wine champagne. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are 2 of those grapes. And so with that in mind, you'll start learning about these regions, the wines that are produced and the grapes that go into producing those wines. And the next question is very much along those lines. Chablis is an example of which style of wine? Is it a sparkling red, a dry white, a still red or a sparkling white? So this is where you need to recall, well, what do Chablis produce? Bit of a clue on the previous slide, of course, because we were talking about white wine styles. They didn't come up under sparkling, which must make Chablis a dry white style, which it is, of course. It's made from the Chardonnay grape at the very northern tip of Burgundy. How would you describe a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc? Is it light-bodied still red wine? Is it a fortified wine? Is it fruity and high in acidity? Or is it a medium-bodied sparkling wine? Again, another typical example of what you might expect. You're given a country, you're given a grape, you're expected to know the styles that are produced by that country. Sauvignon Blanc is of course a white grape, meaning we can discount some of these here immediately. The correct answer is that a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is fruity with high acidity. With a few very well-known regions and styles covered, the next assessment criteria is asking you to identify and relate other examples of wines to the types, characteristics and styles of wines. So for white wine, you may cover things like Sauterne. For rosé, it might be white Zinfandel. For red, you might start to look at Beaujolais, the wines of the Côte du Rhône, Chianti, Rioja and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. For sparkling, you might get a little bit broader than champagne and start to look at Prosecco and Cava, and then you'll introduce those fortified wines as well. Things like sherry and port are also going to be covered. And it's through that you're going to get similar questions to what we covered on the last assessment criteria, where you need to be able to explain the type of wine that's produced when it's labelled a certain way. So Chateauneuf de Pape, let's say our wine is labelled Chateauneuf de Pape. What style of wine is that? Is that a light-bodied still red wine? Is it a light-bodied fortified white wine? Is it a full-bodied still red wine? Or is it medium-bodied sparkling wine? And again, through your coursework, this is where you'll start to learn about the styles, some of the characteristics of that particular wine, you know, what flavours and aromas you might expect. And here we're talking about Chateauneuf de Pape, so we're talking about a wine from the Southern Rhone in France. They produce full-bodied still red wines. Next up, white Zinfandel can be described as what style of wine? Is it a white wine, a fortified wine, a rosé wine, or a sparkling wine? And again, you may not go into the specifics about Zinfandel as a grape and where it's grown. It's more about understanding what a bottle of Zinfandel is going to produce in terms of characteristics, the style, the aromas, the flavours. And this particular question is all about the style of wine. So white Zinfandel is a rosé wine. That's learning outcome number 2 covered. A series of questions all about the grapes and the wines that they produce. And like I say, this is where 60% of the exam sits. So this is really where you need to focus your studies. Every learning outcome is important, but this is where the exam is going to be won and lost. I hope learning outcome 2 has been useful for you. Don't forget to check back for part 3. For now, I'm the Grape Explorer. See you again soon. Cheers.